Welcome to the Fantasy Formula One podcast. I am your host, Paul, and we are going to pause get the audio right here. We're going to pause the driver bios to discuss some breaking news. Normally, this isn't a breaking news podcast, but we're definitely going to discuss this as it will have far-flung implications in the Fantasy Formula One world. And that fact is that Mercedes Hamilton is, at the end of the year, going over to Ferrari. And I'm going to draw your attention to an article from the F1 website that Bill Buxton wrote, and there's a quote in there. It's a very good article, but one line specifically hit me, and his quote, "This is the most successful driver in the history of the sport, moving to the most successful team in the history of the sport," unquote. Now, that is extremely not only astute, but at the heart of everything here. All right, it's very easy for us here in the Fantasy Formula One podcast, or for people who are just newer to fans that are newer to the sport over the last couple of years, going like, well, if Hamilton got all these victories with Mercedes, what's going on with Ferrari? Why would he go to Ferrari? Ferrari hasn't had a good trend in the last 5 years. Well, we're going to look at the stats real quick before we go into all the other stuff, and we're going to point out why. So, a contributing factor. I'm not going to pretend that I'm in Hamilton's head, but just looking at the points, just looking at the championship points, looking at the fantasy points, a trend that has emerged that could be a very strong indicator as to why Hamilton is making this move. I'm not going to show up any graphs. I'm just pulling all this from the F1 website. So I encourage you to, always like in life in this world, I encourage you to do your own research and draw your own opinions about everything. But so I'm going to tell you some very interesting data I'm pulling off this website and tell you my conclusion on it. And you can let me know if you agree, disagree, or you can just take it moving forward in the season. Because this is going to be very, 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 even though this change doesn't take place until next Fantasy F1 season, the fact that this knowledge is public going into the 2024 season is pivotal, is instrumental. So, in 2016, Mercedes Nico Rosberg driver, he won it. So won the entire championship with 385 points. Okay? So think, best in the world, Mercedes, 385. Cool. Second place was Lewis Hamilton, also a Mercedes driver, and he had 380. So, 2016, the top two cars in the world were Mercedes, and they were neck and neck, right? They were both the best. And just so happened that Nico beat out Lewis. Fine. Third place, and this is going to be important, Daniel Ricciardo in a Red Bull. All right? Daniel Ricciardo in a Red Bull had 256 points. So, Daniel, third place, the guy who's brand new, right? Replacement driver last year. Okay, who's this guy? Well, he was third, and he's a third-place driver in the World Championship in 2016. Go on to the next year, 2017. Rosenberg's out. The new Mercedes driver is Valtteri Bottas. Okay? Lewis Hamilton now wins the whole thing with 336 points. So he scored less points overall, but won the championship. Valtteri Bottas, his teammate, scored 305 points. And remember, the year before, 385, 380. Now in 2016, 336, 305. So Mercedes as a team is scoring less points in 2017 than they did in 2016. Well, where are those points going? Well, Sebastian Vettel who is a Ferrari driver, got fourth place in 2016 with 212. Got second place in 2017 with 317. So Ferrari's on the up climb, and while Mercedes still is winning the championship, they're now split by a Ferrari. And a little guy named Max Verstappen pulls in 168 points in his Red Bull, bringing up sixth in the overall championship in 2017. 2018, Lewis Hamilton, first place, good for him, 408 points. So he does better. But now, second and third place are Ferraris with 320 and 205 points, respectively. Where's the Mercedes? Well, Valtteri Bottas is now 247 points. So Lewis Hamilton stepped up, the other Ferrari dropped off, and now it goes Vettel, Raikkonen, 2 Ferrari drivers in second and third, and the fourth place was Max Verstappen in a Red Bull with 251 points. So, as we're watching this trend, Mercedes formed up spots 1 and 2. There was a split. They overall took less points. 1 Ferrari came in. Now we're into 2018. It's even a further split. Yeah, Lewis Hamilton's still on top, but now both Ferraris are up there, and so is a little guy named Max Verstappen. I say a little guy because it's like the whole, like, oh, here's this little player, here he goes, and now suddenly he's, it's top. It's an expression. Don't read into it. 2019, Lewis Hamilton wins again with 413 points. So he's not improving. He is winning how he is. He's doing great. But he's not getting more points, notably more points year to year to year. If anything, he is now in 2019 just as fast, pulling in just the same amount of points as he was in 2016. Meanwhile, so again, Valtteri Bottas is now with his Mercedes and driving, getting second place with 326 points. So in 2016, 3 years before this, they were first and second with 480, 405. Now they're first and second with 413 and 326. Mercedes is hemorrhaging points. Mercedes is not doing better year to year. Who is doing better year to year? Well, Max Verstappen is now third with 278 points. What do you have in 2018? He had 249. So now Max Verstappen is continuing to do better, and now he's climbing into third place. Where are both of the Ferraris at? Well, both of the Ferraris, Leclerc and Vettel, are now 226 and 240. And where's Carlos Sainz right now? Well, he's driving for McLaren, and he is sixth. So both of Mercedes are 1 and 2, but they're overall worse off than they were 3 years before this. And now Max Verstappen's in third. 2020, Lewis Hamilton still wins. Good for him. 343 points. 2019, he won with 413. 2020, he wins with 347. So he lost a significant number of points. Still won, still good for him, but he's trending backwards. By 4 years before this, his teammate won with another 50% of points, call it, than he has now. Valtteri Bottas, I think I might be mispronouncing his name. Valtteri Bottas wins with second place with 223, compared to his 326. So Valtteri Bottas still gets second in the Drivers' Championship, but he's lost 100 of his 325 points. He's down. He's detracted by 25% of his points overall, 30% of his points overall. He's still second. Good for him. But where are these points going? Well, they're getting spread out to everybody else, because now Max Verstappen from Red Bull is a solid third, and Sergio Perez, who's driving with Racing Point, is fourth. Daniel Ricciardo, who's now driving with Renault, is fifth, and Carlos Sainz is sixth. Where are all the Ferraris? Well, Charles Leclerc was 8th in 2020, and Sebastian Vettel, who is now, what happened? Where did he go? Vettel is now 13th. So 2020, Ferrari dropped off. Got it. We could dig into why that happened, but the important thing for us to remember here is that Mercedes is still strong. They're still pulling in 1 and 2, just like they were 4 years before this, but they're doing it with 2/3 of the points. The rest of the points are being spread out along the field. So everybody else is getting better. Mercedes isn't. And now, for the second year in a row, Max Verstappen and Red Bull are pulling in third. And the fourth best driver in the world, Sergio Perez, driving for Racing Point, was fourth. And again, Daniel Ricciardo, driving for Renault, is fifth. 2021. Max Verstappen leapfrogs ahead with 395 points. Lewis Hamilton has the best year he's had since 2016 with 387.5 points. Pulls him in second. So he literally got in 2020, he won with 347. In 2021, he loses with 387. So he gets 40 more points and loses to Max Verstappen in a Red Bull. Valtteri Bottas, his teammate, what happens? Gets 226 points, doesn't improve. Valtteri Bottas had 223 points in 2020, 326 points in 2021. So basically average, basically the same, but now he's pulling in third instead of second. So Ferrari isn't improving, and Red Bull just propelled themselves ahead. And in 2021, Sergio Perez had shifted to Red Bull, and he pulled in fourth. Carlos Sainz in his Ferrari Carlos Sainz was now driving for Ferrari, came in fifth, and Leclerc was driving for Ferrari still, came in seventh, and a new driver named Lando Norris pulled in sixth, driving for McLaren. So that's 2021. All right, so Max Verstappen, and it was actually a really good end of the series. I mean, it's not really good, but they end up basically having a drag race, the last race of the year, to see who's going to get their championship. If you watch the run-up, it was a little bit of contrived by the FIA, I think, but that's okay, right? I'm not the one running it. It's not my company. Anyway, so Max Verstappen pulls in his first championship, and Lewis Hamilton loses his first championship in several years while getting the most points he's had that whole time. 2022, Max Verstappen, 405 points. So now, watching the evolution. First place, Max Verstappen, Red Bull, 395.5. The next year, 450. So Max Verstappen gets an extra 60 championship points. Remember, all these championship points are, zero sum, right? There are a certain amount available for qualifying, a certain amount available for races, and now for the sprints. But there's no more points this year than there were before. Maybe if there's another race or something, right, there might be a little bit more. But overall, it's a finite pool of points. The fact that Max Verstappen gets some means somebody else can't. So what happens in 2021? Max Verstappen barely beats it out. Ferraris are 1 and 2, splitting the Red Bull. Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez at 1 and 4. And you'll hear that expression in F1 a lot, splitting the Ferraris or splitting the Red Bulls. And the reason why it's significant is technically the cars should be pretty close to the same. Yes, each driver wants it a little bit different. So the fact that one driver does fourth, one driver does first, that's usually, it's an indicator that's down to the drivers being better or worse if they both have the same options with their equipment. 2022, here we go. Max Verstappen still wins with 554 points. Remember, 2021, he had just around 395. Now he gets his 50 points more. Charles Leclerc comes in second with his Ferrari. Then Sergio Perez comes in third with his Red Bull. George Russell comes in fourth with his Mercedes. And then there's Carlos Sainz, and then Lewis Hamilton pulls up sixth. So, assuming Lewis Hamilton hasn't lost his nerve, assuming he's not losing a step as a driver, assuming he's not just like giving up, which he of course is not. I don't want to put that in anybody's heads. If you're getting a clip off this, don't sit there and be like, wow, they said on the podcast that Lewis Hamilton's lost a step. I'm not saying that at all. I'm assuming that he hasn't, because I don't believe he has. And why do we say that? Well, 204 points in 2022. Lewis Hamilton gets 240 points and comes in sixth. And flipping back to the 2020 year, the same amount of points would have gotten Lewis Hamilton second. So it's not to say that they're doing bad. They're just not improving like everybody else around them. So remember, in 2020, Valtteri Bottas had 223 points, and that was good enough to get him second. In 2022, Lewis Hamilton has 240 points, and that gets him sixth. So they're pulling in the same amount of points. They're just not improving. And then down to 2023, Max Verstappen, 557 points in the championship. His teammate, Sergio Perez, 285. Lewis Hamilton, 234. Now, keep in mind, this year, 234 is enough for him to get third. But he's not improving. They've backslidden, and now they're stagnant. Mercedes isn't getting more championship points year to year to year to year. And there's Mercedes and George Russell, who was better in the overall standings the year before, now gets 175 points. And in 2024, we will see. So that is a example just based on overall team performance since 2016 for the last 9 years. It's not that Mercedes has been doing bad. They just haven't been doing good. They haven't been improving like everybody else. Meanwhile, Red Bull has catapulted to the front and Mercedes hasn't had an answer. I remember late in the year last year, it came out in the news somewhere that Lewis Hamilton was going to be spending a lot of time at the Mercedes factory trying to get the car to be set up the way he wanted, trying to make sure down to the little parts it was what he wanted. My guess is that didn't work out so well. So the fact that he is going to Ferrari, it checks out with me. It checks out that he spent so much time with Mercedes. They haven't won in a number of years. They haven't won in 3 years, but they've been sliding back. Their trend has been getting negative for the last 9. So he's going to go to a team with, if you look back all the way through history, Ferrari has done a lot more than Mercedes, so it makes sense. So that's one thing. I totally back his... I understand, I should say. No one's asking me if I back it or not, but I understand his position as why he'd want to go to Ferrari. So why is this important, again, for the fantasy Formula One world? Well, I've beaten the drum a lot about how in the fantasy F1 world, the actual drivers in reality, in the real F1, don't care about what goes on in the fantasy F1 world, right? They don't. Fantasy F1 is for fans like us who really want to have an increased stake in the game, who want to be able to predict what's going on with the drivers. That's why we enjoy fantasy Formula One. But the actual Formula One, they don't race F1 to satisfy the fantasy F1 world. However, just because we can work with the fact, I should say, that the real world doesn't have the same priorities as the fantasy world, right? We can. Like, for example, and one of the big ways is the fact that in the fantasy F1 world, if you get a DNF, at least in 2023, you get negative 20 points. In the real F1 world, whether you finish 11th or you finish out, whether you finish 20th, it doesn't matter. You don't get negative points, right? So we can accept that. However, now there's a further division where now the drivers' goals might not be in line with the teams. Now, I'm not saying that they would ever throw it, but what I'm saying is, my personal opinion is that now both Hamilton and Sainz, they might have a different goal with how they race this year, specifically with Hamilton. So let's start with that. Since Hamilton knows right now his car won't win. He's watched the trends just as well as we have. He's lived the trends, and he knows that his car is not putting up the points required to win a championship. If his car was doing it, they would have won a championship. Or one of them would have, right? But they're not. So he has especially now that he's going to another team, he has zero drive to put himself at risk. Sure, he's getting a little bit older, but F1 is dangerous in the best of times, right? I don't think we're going to see the same highly aggressive Lewis Hamilton that we've been seeing. We're not going to see the guy who's going out for blood with the dagger in between his teeth, going after Max Verstappen, going after the championship. I think he's still going to strive for it, absolutely. But I don't think he's going to be doing anything stupid. I think he's going to, kind of like how if you know you're going to be leaving a job, or if you know the relationship's not working, you'll go through the motions, but you're not going to try and get employee of the month, right? You're just not. If you know that it's ending, you will do your job, you'll sit in your box and you'll do your work, but you're not going to put in extra hours. You're not going to try and, do big over. You're not going to spend money on a relationship. You're not going to do all of this if you're like, man, this is going to end. It needs to end. Well, I think that's where, especially where Lewis Hamilton's going to be, because why is he going to risk putting himself in a wall? Why is he going to risk doing injury? He is going to drive the machine that he is given, and if that machine can't get him, and he will drive it aggressively, I'm not saying he's not. He'll do his best, but he'll do his best, and then when the car doesn't make it there, he's going to point to it and be like, see, I told you it didn't work. If it did work, then I'd be winning. And meanwhile, Mercedes is going to saying, well, we've given you all the support and stuff we can over the years. We're not going to put more money into your car this year, because as soon as you're not driving it, we'll have to reinvest that money again to fix it for whoever comes in your place. So I think we will see a very cookie-cutter, still aggressive as he can be, but a very cookie-cutter Lewis Hamilton for 2024. And why that matters for fantasy drivers is we cannot count on Lewis Hamilton to be that aggressive person with a knife in his teeth. Ergo, the value of Hamilton needs to decrease. Lewis Hamilton is one of the highest valued drivers in the fantasy Formula One game. And Mercedes is one of the top 3 fantasy Formula One constructors. Not this year. Not this year. You should not. I'm not saying you should not. You should be very cautious when getting Lewis Hamilton on your team. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe all of this is completely wrong, and he is going to be ever so aggressive, and he's going to push the limits even more than he did last year. He might. I don't think he will, because his sights are already looking ahead, and all he has to do is stay out of trouble this year. And as soon as he drives it really great, he can point to the team and say, nope, you didn't give me a good enough car, which is why I'm leaving. The team can look at him, point to him, and say, hey, he just wasn't giving us his 100%, which he was. He's not giving us his 100%, so that's why we're not winning. They both have their alibis, and this year is not going to be a wash. They're still going to try and do their jobs. They're still professional, but it's not going to be. We as the fantasy players cannot count on their value being the same in 2023 as it is in 2024. So Sainz, all right, and I need to do more research about all the politics and stuff going on with Ferrari, but Charles Leclerc has been there a lot longer than Carlos Sainz has. Carlos Sainz has bounced around a little bit, so it makes sense that he's the one who's leaving. But Carlos Sainz did better than 2023. No, I guess I didn't. No, Carlos Sainz had 200 points, and Charles Leclerc had 206. So Carlos Sainz is younger, but he overall didn't place higher than his teammate. So, of course, it makes sense that they would get rid of him, and there's probably other politics going on. But now what about Carlos Sainz, though? Because he can't just sit back and coast. Maybe he can. Maybe he already has a place lined up. I know there's been some rumblings about what team he's going to. I'm not going to guess on that. I'll talk about the facts once they're out there concerning that. But where is he going to go? Well, if he already has a place lined up, if he already has a home lined up who wants him, he just hasn't announced it yet, then we could see him act very similar to how I predict Hamilton will, right? He'll be aggressive, but as soon as the car is not there, he's going to point to the team and say, hey, you're not putting money into my car, which they shouldn't if he's leaving at the end of the year, outside of a certain limit. It depends. Maybe they're going to try and make him push really hard and there's no bad blood, and they're going to try and make him world champion. They could, and that'd be awesome for Ferrari if they did. I'm not saying that Ferrari is not going to try and win. I'm saying that, like Mercedes, as soon as the relationship's over, they're going to put their money into Charles Leclerc, not Carlos Sainz. And then Sainz, if he is trying to get his new seat still, he'll be very aggressive. He's wanting to still show that he has it. This is the last year he's going to be sitting in arguably one of the best constructor cars in the world. And any place, if you leave Ferrari, unless you go to Red Bull, you are backtracking a little bit in your car quality. So you're going to need to put forth 110% if he's still looking for a ride. If he's not looking for a ride, if he has a ride, he already has that worked out, then he'll act like I predict Hamilton will. But if he doesn't, then he's going to be pushing it. And I think we can really see some good aggressiveness for Carlos Sainz. However, if Mercedes isn't giving him the car he can use, if they're not putting more money into it, race by race, upgrade by upgrade, then we could see him drop off, just like we could see Hamilton drop off. And this comes into a very interesting concept that doesn't very well translate from real life F1 to fantasy F1, and that is the concept of team orders, right? Or team orders, team rules. So in F1, you can have team orders where it's like, hey, if you and I are both racing for Ferrari, you have more championship points than I do, and we're halfway through the season. If I'm in the front and you're behind me, you have the better chance of winning overall than I do, so I should let you pass. And we would get the call from the pit wall saying, hey, let your teammate around. And sometimes you'll have one race to race, have one teammate that's overall faster lap to lap than the next one. And so team orders, let your friend pass. Or team orders, you stay out there one more time, we're going to pit him so he has faster tires to compete against whoever. And it is, as a military man, as a retired military man, team orders is what we eat, sleep, and breathe, right? Because we're all one team, one fight. And we have to trust our chain of command. We have to trust our superiors to know what's going on. So as soon as I'm doing really well and you're like, hey, back it off, we need him to go for this reason. Well, that should be pre-discussed, pre-briefed, and the driver should be sitting there knowing what different race scenarios are going to be and who's going to be passing who and stuff like that. And to the extent they're not addressed that way, then they need to have faith in their team leadership. We don't have that in Fantasy F1, right? There's no way. As soon as I get two drivers on the same team and the constructor, the only way, I guess, actually maybe there's a little way, I can give one of them the 3 times DRS boost, but there's not really a way to handle those team orders. So in this case, as soon as I really love Ferrari and I have Sainz and Leclerc and Ferrari as a constructor, assuming it's the same way in 2024 as it was in 2023, I know that that Sainz is going to be treated secondary to Leclerc. But there's not really a good way, aside from the 3x DRS boost, there's not really a good way to accommodate for that. All around, it's just, it throws a big question mark into, I kind of got off on the rabbit trail there. All in all, it sends like a big question mark into Carlos Sainz and Lewis Hamilton's performance. And since those are under question, we have to be skeptical of Ferrari and Mercedes' performance this year. Not necessarily that they won't perform, but both of those teams make up 2/3 of the top 3 teams. They are very, very expensive teams to have on your fantasy Formula One team. And as soon as you're going to spend 20%, 25% of your overall operating budget on like Sainz or Hamilton, expecting them to be back where they normally were, and they're not, well, then you're wasting your money. You need to divide that up among your McLarens and among your, maybe the second drivers for Ferrari and Red Bull, right? Sorry, for Ferrari and Mercedes. Or both of the drivers for Red Bull. Because say what you will about Perez, I know there's been a lot of gossip and stuff in the media about, is he going somewhere else? Is he going to stay? Are they bringing in this person or that person? He had 285 championship points. He was second place by over 50. No. Red Bull is 1 and 2. They're not going to get rid of those guys. They're not going to get rid of them until somebody splits them. Then whoever has a bad luck to get split could be finding it somewhere else. But no one is coming near them. There are as many points between third and second as 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 50 points as there is between. There's as many points between second and third as there is between third and eighth. All right. So there's Lewis Hamilton out here. There's Lewis Hamilton. Sorry. There's Max Verstappen. There's, right in the camera. There's Max Verstappen. There's Sergio Perez. And then all the way back here is where you have, Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez, Lewis Hamilton. And then way back here is you have all the other 8. Sergio Perez isn't going anywhere. He's fine, at least based on this data. And for Fantasy F1, Red Bull is coming into the season very, very... Oh, here's the summary, right? I'll quit talking because I love talking. What changes from this, Red Bull is coming into the season very, 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 very strong. Ferrari and Mercedes are coming in with massive question marks over each of their drivers. And as soon as those drivers don't get the upgrades they need, as soon as they just race like they were going to race and try and take it conservatively and are not risking putting themselves in a wall, or as soon as the teams start giving them start sacrificing them on team orders for the people who are still going to be around, then their value is just not going to be worth it. You can take all that operating budget that you would gamble for the Ferrari and the Mercedes and put it into a lot of other drivers like Sergio Perez, like Max Verstappen, right? Like Red Bull, like the guy. Where did he do? Daniel Ricciardo. All right, this guy got in third in the championship several years back. All he needs is a good car. And I know there's a lot of drama about him, about how he was, going team to team because he was wanting to be the first driver. Didn't work out, and now he's out, and now he's back in. So what are we going to do about that, right? He is going to be a great driver, assuming as soon as he has a good car, he can definitely put up the points because he's done it before. Again, the best pound for pound driver, not one of the best, but one of the strong pound for pound drivers that we talked about earlier, Zhou Guanyu, he's doing great. And there's plenty of other very, very strong drivers out there that we can spend a lot of our budget on the drivers that we know are going to be good. And again, hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully Mercedes and Ferrari have wonderful seasons. They're some of the top-ranked drivers in all of the fantasy Formula One game. I'm very good at part of what I did for the military is risk analysis and be able to see those problems as they come over the horizon and know what to do with them. I see huge problems for Ferrari and for Mercedes this year, especially in the fantasy game when every point matters and who you put your operating budget to for one race could have major implications for the overall season. Remember, my friends league, I lost the championship by 12 points because I didn't believe in Ferrari. Now they're having this shift up, so maybe I am predisposed to not like them. But I do know that 12 points pushed me from first to third or fourth, one of the two. 12 points. And in the fantasy F1 game, these little things that are going on with these teams could equate to that small margin. Well, I hope this helped. We'll probably be I know I have a couple guests lined up to come into the studio and to talk about things, including this. So we'll get you some more insight and analysis as everything breaks. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you later. Cheers.